They were small-time, pretty useless criminals when it came to it. They were twins, and they were murderous twins, and there aren't too many of those around. And that starts their little industry, really, because there were T-shirts, there were key rings, there were games. They loved being seen with celebrities.
I was only looking at something last night and it mentioned that there was 33 books written about the Krays between the various members of the firm, the girlfriends, other people who kind of came in contact with them, and police officers. Everyone seems to have a book in them about the Krays. So I suppose you have now written what will be the definitive account, where you have challenged the myths and tried to tell the true story. But what is the obsession with them, and how has it kind of survived the decades?
I've no idea, quite honestly, because they were small-time, pretty useless criminals when it came to it. The other big firm at the time in South London were the Richardsons, who were far smarter, far more intelligent than the Krays, but they very sensibly kept their heads down under the parapet. The Krays craved publicity. They were forever taking out elderly boxers, failing film stars, Judy Garland, Joe Lewis, Sonny Liston. They loved being seen with celebrities. And that, I think, is part of their myth, that they created themselves. The second, they were twins, and they were murderous twins, and there aren't too many of those around.
No.
The third thing was that the East End was being revived after the bombing. It didn't actually pick up until the late 50s, early 60s. And also there was the start of the working class revival, in that up until then you had film stars like George Formby, Gracie Fields, but they were to a certain extent figures of fun. You now became involved with Arnold Wesker, the kitchen sink people, John Brain, who had room at the top, and working class people became people in their own right rather than just comic characters. And I think all those combined, plus of course 30 years was 30 years.
Yeah.
A long sentence on anyone's showing.
Longer career in prison nearly than they had in the criminal underworld.
I think that's right.
Yeah.
But I mean, the 30 years, the train robbers had got 30 years, but that was only half. They all came out after 10, 12, that sort of thing. But the twins, or Reggie actually, just did his 30 plus.
So bring us back to, one of the things you've cited there as part of their celebrity is that they were twins. So they were born October 1933.
Yes.
And it was unusual to have twins then. Did they die during birth usually, or,
Yes, was... and there was a tremendous infant mortality in the East End and indeed in slums generally around England and Europe really at the time. So there was a very high mortality rate, and that was a start that they survived. I think they were both quite ill, very young.
Right.
Ronnie in particular, but he survived. And so that was most unusual. But I don't think that necessarily contributed to their fame. What really brought them to fame was John Pearson's Profession of Violence.
Right.
Which was really, for a long time, the definitive book on them. He takes them from really childhood to the time they get arrested.
Yes, yeah, which is in their 30s.
Yes, they would be.
Yeah.
They would be. If it's 1933 they're born, they're arrested when they're 35. Yes, 35.
So when they started in their life of crime, I think they started with extortion rackets and acting as heavies for others.
Yes, there was a family, a North London family, to whom they were aligned, certainly. I don't know that they ever actually worked for them, but they were good boxers, of course, themselves.
Their grandfather, I think, was a famous...
Yes, he was a cobbles fighter, really. Right. But Reggie was in the ring and they were all in the ring, Charlie, Reggie and Ronnie, but Reggie was thought to actually have had the opportunity, as they say, to have been a contender. I mean, he won all his fights, he trained, but Ronnie would sort of brawl. Charlie wasn't really that interested. His last fight, he hadn't had a fight for a year before that. He was mixed with... I think it was a welterweight who went on to become British champion. He really got beaten badly. Then the kids, the Krays, go into the army, whereupon they dislike that intensely. They knock out the commanding sergeant the first day, go on the run. Very sensibly, they go a long way. They go straight back to Mum, where they're found the next day having breakfast.
She always takes them in, doesn't she?
She took them in, but that seems even about...
She's a typical gangster's mother.
Yes, absolutely, yes.
So, Ronnie in particular, I think they have said, and you have said in your book, had a mental illness.
Serious mental problems.
Serious mental
problems. He was probably schizophrenic, I would have thought anyway. And he really has to be on medication to keep him under sort of...
Was it diagnosed now? Was it actually...
Well, I think it was, yes.
Yeah.
They had a tame doctor who looked after him, a man called Blasker, who, curiously enough, has now got a street named after him on the Isle of Dogs, Blasker Way, I think it is, but he was their tame doctor, and he kept Ronnie under medication.
So he was like their own doctor, that they...
Well, yes. Well,
was he doing it officially, or...
Well, no, all good gangs have got their own doctors.
Yeah, okay. Don't know what they do anymore, do they? I suppose to stitch them up and that kind of thing if they need to.
Bullet wounds, a shilling at times, sort of thing. Yes,
but that would have been recognised in Ronnie as the Krays kind of had become quite notorious in East London.
As they grow up, yes.
He is much more volatile. He sort of loses his temper and is very violent. Was he sent to a mental hospital after a stint in prison for...
Yes, what happens is he goes down for 5 years, I think it is, over a fight down the East End in a pub called the Artichoke, where one man is really... who had nothing to do with the opposition. He just happened to be there and related vaguely, and he gets cut very, very badly. Ronnie gets 5 years, goes to prison, and it works out reasonably well until he gets moved out of London, and he can't cope with the Isle of Wight, which is where one of the big maximum security prisons are. And he just can't cope, and his mentality deteriorates. And I think at one time he thinks the man in the bed opposite him is a dog who'll jump on his lap.
Right.
He really was seriously disturbed.
Yeah.
And then, of course, the great thing was that they got him out of a mental hospital where he was in a brilliant coup in that Reggie turns up dressed in the same uniform, not the same uniform, same suit, because the patients in the hospital wore civvies, and he turns up dressed identically. Ronnie goes off at the end of the visit, leaving Reggie, who says, well, I think I'm going home now. And they say, oh, no, you're not. Reggie says, well, why not? I'm Reggie. I'm not Ronnie. Ronnie, by this time, had gone up to Suffolk, where the good Dr. Blasker was ferrying up pills for him. But again, he didn't like the countryside too much. He was a London boy, and he pined for it. Eventually, he's caught after about a year, finishes off his term. But within a matter of months, he's back in hospital.
So the Krays wound up, after much ado, getting very lengthy sentences.
Yes.
The two brothers, Ronnie and Reggie, they were separated behind bars, sent to different prisons. And that's really where their celebrity really, really begins. There's rogues in every business, including my own. But they are fascinating. What is your kind of overall view of them? Do you think that their celebrity is warranted, or do you feel that just a sort of a culmination of quirky
I think they were lucky in a way. For their fame, they were lucky. They were the right time, the right people, the right public.
I think Ronnie died in prison, is that right?
Yes.
And Reggie was released with terminal cancer.
Yes, Ronnie dies, I think it's 1995. Charlie has gone down again on a big drugs deal. Ronnie dies in 95. Charlie dies in the spring of 2000. There have been tremendous long campaigns to get Reggie out. 30, he only killed his own. He, was kind, helped ladies halfway across the road and things. But if you read the prison records, he just will not realise that he doesn't hold the whip hand. If he's going to get out, he has to cooperate.
Right.
And he's found people in his cell drink. He won't go and see the probation officer that the prison want him to see. He has to see somebody he knows. He's forever changing his mind. He'll go and live in Warwickshire. He'll go and live in Somerset. He just doesn't cooperate enough. He certainly does when he marries Roberta Kray. But by then he's an old, elderly, sick man, and they let him out.
And where does he find her? She rides to him, I presume?
Sorry?
She rides to him, I presume?
No. She's sent down, I think, on a television company to interview him. And he becomes involved with her. She becomes involved with him. But he's old and sick, and he's, as you say, let out to die. I think he only lasts a fortnight after his release.
Yeah, and she's the grieving widow who orchestrates the funeral then?
Yes, well, originally it was going to be, we'd had one gangland, we'd had Mum's funeral, then we'd had Ronnie's, the Colonel's funeral, then we had Charlie, and then we had Reggie, but what she didn't want was another big gangland funeral with faces carrying the coffin. And to a certain extent, she shut that down. Obviously, she couldn't prevent a very big turnout. And I don't suppose she would have wanted to prevent a turnout, but it wasn't the gangland funeral.
She tried to rewrite the end of the story.
Yeah, I think she wanted to try and separate him at the end, yes.
Well, with what has happened since, even in his ongoing celebrity. And Thank you very much, James Morton. That's extremely interesting.
Thank you very
Krays,
much.
we're still talking about them.